Yeah, let's talk about creatine a little bit. I'm a huge fan of creatine. I think it's a supplement that pretty much everybody should be on. I mean, unless you have like a medical condition that specifically contraindicates its use. But there seems to be a ton of data coming out now about not just benefits for physical performance, body composition, but also cognitive health and mental health. It's a super fascinating time for creatine. You want to maybe unpack some of that literature for us?
Yeah, so creatine has been around a long time as a supplement, and it's been studied basically more than anything else. Like the only things that come close to it are like whey protein powder and essential amino acids. The core mechanisms of action, like how creatine works, I think is helpful to understand because that helps back up our understanding of why it would help with muscle, but then potentially why it would help with things like cognition. So creatine is basically an alternative energy source. People are typically familiar with aerobic and anaerobic energy systems. It's like when you exercise, whether you're using oxygen, how hard you're running, basically, right? Well, there's this third energy system called the phosphocreatine energy system. And what that is when our body actually makes some creatine, but we also can get it from fish and meat. That's fish and red meat. That's primarily where you get it from. And there's a small amount you make inside your body. And then that creatine gets stored inside of our muscle cells as these phosphocreatine stores. And what those phosphocreatine stores do is when it's time to create a burst of energy, so it's like I'm doing pull-ups, or it could also be with cardio type stuff like sprinting, but basically really intense short bursts of energy. Rather than trying to convert energy via the aerobic or the anaerobic energy system, it quickly converts that phosphocreatine into ATP. And thus, the benefits typically that have been studied with creatine are these people who like to lift weights take creatine, they take it consistently, it gets built up in their cells and their muscle, and when they go to lift weights, and I used to be able to do 8 reps of this certain exercise, suddenly I can do 10. And it's because you actually have more of this raw energy stored in the muscles. Now, if you take that consistently and you continue to lift weights or you continue to sprint, you're going to get better. You're going to get stronger. You're going to get faster, etc. So basically in the short term, it actually just gives you this kind of burst of energy to perform exercise. In the long term, the functional outcomes are that you build more lean muscle. You get stronger, you get quicker, etc. And that has hundreds of studies. Like that's a pretty hard one to debate.
Want to hear a fun fact? I wrote my high school senior thesis on creatine monohydrate.
I love that.
That's how long I've been in this game.
I love that.
Yeah. I don't know how rigorous my research was at the time, but whatever sources I had available to me, I mean, yeah, I was able to cobble together this. It was like an 11-page paper, which at the time was like an insurmountable amount of content to put to page. But
and you were just like a gym nerd guy, or like
I was,
yeah, cool.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
I was never an athlete, but I got into bodybuilding like from a really young age, and I was never even like I wouldn't have called myself a bodybuilder, but I was just very interested in the applied science of bodybuilding.
Cool.
Yeah.
So neat.
Yep.
Yeah. So that literature goes back, that long. The cognitive research is more recent. And so there's been cognitive research. There's also been research, particularly with aging. So I think, naturally, if something's going to help you build and maintain muscle, then like scientists start thinking, could this help with aging? Because sarcopenia is this whole major issue we described where you have this anabolic resistance and you start losing muscle as you age. So they start studying in older populations and they look at, can it improve bone density? Can it improve cognition? I think the quick summary of the bone density is that there's not much there actually, surprisingly, because I think what we thought was, or researchers thought was, well, if you're helping build this muscle, then it's got to help improve bone density as well. And there's not much there as of yet. In terms of cognition, there is some there. It's with much higher doses though. So the typical doses that I think most people are familiar with creatine are about 5 grams. If you're a larger male, it could be more like 10 grams, but that's typically the dose that you would take every day sustainably in order
10 grams.
5 to 10 grams. Yeah. I think 5 grams is like there's a specific calculation based off your weight. I'm forgetting it right now, but if you're closer to if you're over 200 pounds, you could probably do about 10 grams. If you're, If you're 100 pounds, it's probably more like 3. I think the 5 grams is closer to around like 150 pounds. But you won't hurt yourself taking 5 if you weigh 100 pounds, and you won't hurt yourself taking 10 grams if you're, 150 pounds. It's a very safe product. But yeah, you'll get more benefit at slightly higher dosages. We can follow up afterwards. I can make sure you have that for your show notes, like what's the exact, formula for your weight.
Well, I've heard that before though,
Yeah.
like 3 to 5 grams for general maintenance dosing. But then there was a study that came out recently that made waves within our community that found that I think the dose was 10 grams of creatine was able to offset some of the cognitive deficits that occur with sleep deprivation.
Yes. So that's one of the things I was going to get to, is that really the cognitive benefits, more of it has been studied even higher, like at these 20-gram doses. But there was one study that at the 10-gram dose, that basically if you had a poor night of sleep and then you took this higher dose of creatine, you perform slightly better on these cognitive tests. So most of the research has shown that it's kind of confusing. I think you have to really understand how they do all this cognitive research. But basically, memory shows some improvement and focus shows some improvement. But when they look at total executive functioning and like kind of total cognitive functioning, there's not that much of an improvement. It's really primarily in memory and in focus. There was that sleep study though, basically that was like, if you didn't sleep well, it could improve. And I would say that is where more of the research has shown itself to be valuable. It's not like if you have very healthy cognition, it's unlikely that you'll get significant benefits from these higher doses of 10 to 20 grams of creatine. It's specifically if you're under stress. So if you didn't sleep well, if you're undergoing other types of specific stress to like a stage of life, and they've looked at it particularly with people aging. There's not really clear research for people struggling actually with dementia or with Alzheimer's, but other types of cognitive impairment from aging, these higher doses of like 20 grams have improved memory.
Yeah, I continued to take creatine through the recovery process for my surgery, my back surgery. Even though I wasn't working out at the time, I knew that I probably wasn't taking a high enough dose, but I kept on with my 5 gram per day maintenance dose, just with the thinking that, if it's a mitochondrial support, if it helps to support energy production during times of stress for the body, well, there's nothing as stressful as like a surgery.
Yeah.
And so
that's a great thought.
Yeah.
And I would say, so both during the time of that recovery period to support overall cognition, recovery from sleep, but also the body, it's going to be important, but also for when you get back to training, because it does actually have to be saturated. Creatine's not the thing that's like you just take on the days when you work out. You need to take it consistently. The other thing I'd name for you too is like, because you are a big red meat eater, that 5 gram dose, if like your primary source of protein is red meat, you're probably good.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're like a vegan, like I would be going to the much higher doses because you're simply not getting creatine in your diet.
Diet. Yeah. Creatine's a carnonutrient. It's found exclusively in red meat, animal source foods, red meat and fish specifically. So you kind of already alluded to this, but is there value in cycling creatine on and off, or do you think it's something that should be taken consistently every day?
Just taken consistently every day. I think if you cycle off it for a certain period of time, you're not going to there's not going to be some big negative impact, right? So for example, sometimes when I go on vacation, simply because I like to not take things all the time, I just won't bring it and I just won't take it, right? But I don't think that there's this like explicit, clear, scientific based positive reason for why I would stop taking it for a week.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about Kion is that it's gender neutral. Because sometimes you see these brands that are, what is it called? Pink washing or, where they'll market like creatine specifically for women, like a creatine product specifically for women, which to me is total nonsense. Women should take creatine, but there's no difference in a creatine product that should be like specifically designed for women. Like creatine is creatine. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I would say fundamentally creatine monohydrate is the most proven form of creatine, and it doesn't there's no difference in what you would give to a male or a female. That said, it's like if a business is based around, marketing to a specific gender and telling stories in a certain type of way, and that's the way they want to do it. I get it there.
Yeah. Well,
But there's nothing different. There's nothing different in like the women's brand of creatine. It's going to be the exact same thing.
What about concerns that women have that creatine is going to bulk them up? There's a billboard that I've seen driving around LA. It's a certain brand. I'm not going to name the brand. I'm not going to call them out. But it says creatine gummies that bulk, with the word bulk crossed out, and then it says tone right next to it. As if like creatine typically, or from other brands, might be responsible for a bulking effect.
Yeah. So again,
is that just marketing?
Yeah, it's just marketing. The creatine that's going to be in that product versus any other product is going to be if it's creatine monohydrate, it's the same thing. And the way that it works is the way that I described earlier. Basically, it's putting this energy in your cells, this latent energy that enables you to do more exercise.
And if it doesn't do that, then it's either not creatine or it's not going to work.
Yeah. And I think that the idea of, I think more, again, it's just marketing, right? It's like there's this inclination typically for younger men who are maybe smaller, who want to get bigger, to want to bulk, right? So creatine gets marketed and positioned to them to try to convince them it's going to do that. That bulk is largely actually going to come from them eating a lot more calories and lifting a lot more really heavy things, and specific ways that they embrace progressive overload with their training protocol. Like that's how they're going to get really big. And it's going to be based off their hormones too, right? Like if they have a bunch more testosterone, like that's what's going to make them bulk.
Yeah.
If you want to get tone, well then you would not try to overeat the amount of calories that you're eating. You would, and focus probably on like different types of exercises in order to get a more tone physique. The creatine itself is not going to be responsible for that specifically.
And tone just means lean. Like
tone just means lean. Tone just means that you have muscular definition, right? So basically it means that you're building muscle and you're doing it, in a way relative to calories that is more neutral.
What about concerns that some women have that creatine is going to make you look bloated? Because creatine does draw water into it. Does increase the storage of water, but only in certain compartments, right? Like it's not leading to water storage underneath the skin.
Yeah, I think this has actually been a big reason that has probably scared women away from taking creatine, is this idea of bloating, because it's like this idea out there. So the way that it works is that when creatine gets stored in your muscle, it gets stored with water molecules. So yes, when you initially start taking creatine, a bit more water will actually get stored in the site of the muscle itself. It's not going to make you like bloated in your face or your stomach or your belly or legs or something like that. It's literally just going to mean that at the site of the bicep itself, with that creatine, there'll be a little bit more water. So if you did a DEXA scan or an in-body scan or something like that, you might see the water levels go up just a little bit. But actually longer term, there's actually very little, there's conflicting evidence actually of like any absolute increase in water retention.
Oh, interesting.
Over long-term use.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. But it's not like consuming like a really salty meal. Like it's not, the water is not being stored around the muscles. It's being stored directly inside the muscles.
Directly inside of the muscle. Yeah.
So if anything, it's going to make you look better.
It's going to potentially make you look a bit more toned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the opposite.
Yeah. I love it. There's so many misconceptions out there about like supplements, and like one of the more interesting questions that I get is actually from women who will hear me make a recommendation for like a protein powder or a creatine. And the question that I'll get is like, well, what protein powder do you recommend for women? Or what essential amino acid supplement do you recommend for women? Or what creatine do you recommend for women? And I'm always very perplexed. Like, where did this idea come from that women need a specific formulation as compared to men? I mean, maybe the dose differs, so maybe the serving size is going to differ. Gender to gender.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is the potential that with different types of categories of products and different types of functions within the body, that a female body could potentially react differently to something. But in this case, in the case of creatine, protein powder, and essential amino acids, that is not the case.
Yeah.
Like basically it has, you don't need a different type of formulation for those products. The dose though would be different. But again, the issue of the dose is actually, it's not about gender, it's about your body weight. That's really fundamentally what it is. And typically women weigh less than men, and thus they could benefit from a smaller dose.
Interesting. If you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.